Man, I don't really know where to start this morning. We've celebrated 6 baptisms of young kids who are setting an example for us just by going through the process of baptism. And I want us to remember that as a congregation, that's something to celebrate. And I believe that when people come out of the water at baptism, that should be one of the biggest celebrations that happens in a congregation. It should be deafening in the room when they come out of the water. So, don't ever hold back during that time of celebration. But I feel like we've got that going on. I think we need to remember as a congregation that there are 6 little kids that need extra prayer during this time, because the enemy does not like what just happened. The enemy does not like what's happening in this congregation. He does not like what is happening in their lives, what is happening in the lives of their families. And so, church, do not forget to pray for those 6 kids and for their families. Obviously, pray for the rest of the kids too, but especially over those 6 kids. We've gone through a week of storms, which we missed a lot of it because we were on vacation, but as we're singing those words of that last song there, of the rains came and the winds blew, but my house is built on you. Just think back to the last several days. Think back, if you were looking out the window last night and you saw the trees look like they were about to bend over and snap in half, how many of you were thankful that you were in a home that had good protection and had a good foundation on it when the tornado sirens were going off? I was thankful for it. I know that we have many in our area without power. Our children's pastor, she doesn't have power right now. There are people who are going through all sorts of things. We've been struggling because we don't have cell phone service, or we don't have it very good. And we rolled into Kentucky and we lost cell phone service for the past hour and a half, so we couldn't tell the people who were taking care of our dogs that they didn't need to go take care of our dogs anymore because we couldn't reach them. And it kind of stinks to not have it. It's also kind of nice to not have it. It's kind of coming back, and part of me is a little bit sad that we're getting it back. But man, all the storms rolling through, and what a beautiful image that we get to sing this morning about these storms in our lives, but we have a firm foundation on Jesus Christ and how He can hold us through those storms, and He can keep us strong, He can keep us firm through those storms if we stand on Him. What a great reminder. And then my family has spent it was about 10 days all said and done, going down to Florida, and we spent some time at the Kuntz's favorite place in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and we spent a horrible night in Atlanta on our way back, which I think that's just, if you spend time in Atlanta, it's a horrible night, and that's just the way it goes. But while we were down in Florida, yes, there was some vacation time in it, but there was also some incredible time spent hanging out with other pastors and other people from the Church of God movement that we're a part of out of Anderson, Indiana, and hearing from some of the leadership that we have. It was incredible to see for worship, the musical part of worship, there were 5 different bands represented up on the platform from 5 different churches. They didn't hire some big name band to come in and lead us in worship, but they realized we have incredible worship leaders within our movement. Let's bring them together, have them unify together and lead us in worship. Different styles represented, different generations represented, different ethnicities represented, all on the platform together to worship one God. It was an incredible time to be able to worship with the group that was in there. There were some difficult conversations that occurred too. There were these great things called General Assemblies, which are basically the every other year business meeting of the Church of God for about 8 hours. So anytime you come to one of our business meetings and you think it's going too long, 8 hours worth of meetings. That's what I sat through while I was down there. 2 hours per day for 4 days, meetings with all sorts of big things being discussed. And I would love to at some point, if you're sitting there and you're just curious, like, hey, what did we talk about as the Church of God and at this General Assembly thing and all this? I would love to walk through all of that with you. We're not going to do that this morning. But if you have questions about, like, what kind of things did you vote on other than a budget? What were the discussions about? I'd love to answer those questions, because I think it's important for us to understand that we are a part of something so much bigger than Monroe City First Church of God sitting here on a corner in Monroe City, Indiana. But it's something that goes global, all over the world. So all of these different things going on, and I'm sitting there trying to figure out, where do we start this morning? Because there's so many exciting things. But we're going to jump back into Revelation, and we're going to keep rolling right along. For the past 5 weeks, we've been looking at different letters written to different churches in modern-day Turkey that were written 2,000 years ago, 50 years after, or 65 years, sorry, after the resurrection of Christ, from Jesus, given in revelation to a man by the name of John while he was on an island in Patmos in exile. He gives him these words that are meant to encourage and correct the churches back then, but to also encourage and correct our churches today. And at the end of each one of these letters, he says something very similar to this statement, where he will say, "For those with ears, or with those with ears to hear, let them hear." And so this morning, as we get ready to really jump in and we look at a letter to a church in a city called Philadelphia, which is, we'll talk a little bit about Philadelphia and what they were and who they were. But as we get ready to do that, I ask us this morning, do we have ears to hear? Do we have ears to hear the encouragement that Jesus gave? Do we have ears to hear the correction that Jesus gave to those churches long ago, but also to the church today? Do we have ears to hear the truth that is revealed in these words? Revelation means to reveal or to unveil truth. Do we have ears to hear that truth this morning? Or are there too many distractions in our world and we can't hear what it is? This morning, I want us to start off by praying that we would have ears to hear, that we would be able to push aside the distractions, and that we would simply just hear His words. God, we thank you for the words that you gave to John on that island, those words that we know weren't just for him and they weren't just for those 7 churches, but words that are for us today, that will be for however many generations there are to come. But God, right now, we live here in 2023 in southern Indiana. And so we pray that you would open up our ears to your truth, not to Pastor Justin's truth, but to your truth that you revealed to us. God, that we would hear your encouragement, that we would hear your correction, and that we would use those words to sift through our faith and to sort out our lives. God, we pray this in your name. Amen. So each week, we've spent some time looking at the envelope. We started 6 weeks ago by talking about how important it is when you get something in the mail to make sure that it's actually to you, to make sure that whoever's going to open this is the person who's supposed to receive it. We often will spend some time and we look and we see who is this letter from, who is this package from, because it gives us a little bit of an idea at least of what's coming inside the envelope that we're about to open. And so as we get ready to open up the envelope today, we see that it is written to a church in Philadelphia. And when we think Philadelphia, first off, this was not intentional, but I think this was the perfect week to look at the church in Philadelphia, because when we think of Philadelphia, we think Independence Hall. We think of that place where the Constitution was signed, where the Declaration of Independence was signed, where freedoms were declared for the country that we live in. And we discussed this 2 days before the 4th of July. And we begin to look at this. When we think of Philadelphia, we think of the Liberty Bell. When we think of Philadelphia, we think of the 76ers, we think of the Eagles, we think of the city of brotherly love, even though everything that we ever see doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of love going on in Philadelphia, but it's their name, so we have to go by it. We think of all these things, and I don't know about you, but when I think of Philadelphia, a song starts going through my head. Some of you know. Dun 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 dun. You run up those stairs. I want to go to Philadelphia so bad, just to run the stairs. But I recently found out, though, side note, that statue is not at the top of those stairs. It was so disappointing when I found that out. I feel like at 39 years old, I should have already known that. But it's somewhere else in the city. I was so bummed. I wanted to run up and be at the bottom of that statue. And now I'm like, I don't even want to run those stairs anymore. That's just a lot of work for no. I still do. I still do very much. That's not the Philadelphia we're talking about. Just to make it clear. But that's what we think of. However, there are some similarities to the Philadelphia that we're going to look at. It was a major city, although the smallest of the 7 cities and the smallest of the 7 churches that are written to in Revelation, it was still a major city in Asia Minor, what is now modern-day Turkey. just like Philadelphia is a major city today. And it was still a city where there was plenty of idol worship going on. And so as we see a statue of Rocky, they would walk by statues of other gods, and they would worship those other gods. Our worship might look a little bit different today as you walk through Philadelphia. But the worship of other gods still continues in our city named Philadelphia, just like it did in the city of Philadelphia back then. But that's about where the comparisons really end. Because Philadelphia and the church of Revelation was an area much more like where we live right here. Agriculture was its top job. Agriculture was where the money was made. They grew the crops, they shipped the crops, they provided the food for people all over the area. There was also other trade going on, but agriculture, just like in southern Indiana, was the big one. And so as I read through this church, I get excited reading about it. One, because there's a lot of encouragement in this letter. And there's not a lot of correction in this letter, which is kind of refreshing for a little bit. But also because as I read through this letter, I see Monroe City in this letter. No, we're not a major city. Believe me, I get that part. But I see similarities in other ways, that of these 7 churches, they are the smallest. And of these 7 cities, they are the smallest. And of these 7 cities, they're the ones that focuses the most on growing food instead of just eating food. And so I see these similarities begun to open up in this. And so let's open up the letter and let's begin to read what Jesus wrote to this church in Philadelphia. In Revelation chapter 3, beginning in verse 7, he writes, "To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true and holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." Now, we talked a lot about who Philadelphia was and what their city was like, but we also must remind ourselves who this letter is being written from. Who is sending this letter? John wrote it with his hand, but it was from Jesus, and Jesus describes himself as the one who is holy and true, who holds the key of David, who what he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open, which goes way back to Isaiah chapter 22, verse 22. When the prophet wrote, talking about a man who would come later, a Messiah who would come later, "And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He will open, and none will shut. He will shut, and none will open." Jesus is declaring to the church in Philadelphia, I want to make perfectly clear who is sending this letter to you. It is not John on an island. It is not some random guy who lived a good life. The one writing this to you is the Son of God. The one writing this to you is the Messiah. The one writing this to you is the only one to be worshiped, the only way to the Father, the only way to the kingdom. The key of the house of David is writing this to you. Make no mistake, in a world where you are surrounded by idols, theirs made with gold, ours made with so many other things, remember this very clearly as he begins this letter: I am God, and the only real, true God. Do not lose sight of this, church. This is Jesus. And many times we talk about him and we just we simplify him. We sing songs about how he's a friend. And he is a friend, but sometimes we can put him in the friend zone and never take him to that next level of what it truly is to be in relationship with Jesus. And he's saying, I am your only. I am the one who said that you must hate father and mother in order to follow me. And we know that doesn't literally mean we hate our mother and father, but he's saying, your relationship with me is so much higher that it looks like everything else means nothing compared to your relationship with me. Now, we might get uncomfortable with that, and I understand that. I'm not here to simplify his words and to make them more comfortable for us. I'm here to just say what he's telling us. And he's saying, I am your one and only. And then he continues on. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. In other words, he's saying, hey, I know all about you. I know that you're a little church and you're in a smaller city. I know that on the surface you have little strength. That if people looked at you, they wouldn't say, wow, that right there, those are power people right there. Those people right there, they're the ones that I want to rub shoulders with. If people in the United States were looking at this church, they would say, they're one of the smaller churches. We don't really need to pay much attention to what they do. We're gonna go check out the mega churches because they're actually making differences. And this is not me saying that big churches are a bad thing. This is just me saying that people would look at them and say they're not getting much done because their size isn't showing that there's a whole lot going on here. They don't have the resources flowing in to be able to do all the things, to be able to have 100 different ministries going on. But man, he looks at them and he says, but I see what you're doing. And what you're doing with strength. And what you're doing with commitment to me, and I see that. It's as if Jesus looks at them and he says, I know what the world sees when they see you. But I believe in you. I believe in what I have created you to be. I believe in the things that you're doing. I believe in, as you hold firm to me, as I am your firm foundation in the midst of all of these storms that are coming against you. I believe that you can do incredible things. I believe that I created you to be a masterpiece. And I laid things out before you. I see you, Philadelphia. And I see the strength that is in you. Even if the people around you don't see it, I see it. As he looks at this church in Philadelphia, he says, I've got open doors for you, and I know that they don't look like the big wide open doors that you're going to see other places. They don't look like the big wide open doors that you would see if you went and followed another god. With all the excitement that comes with that and all of the material possessions that come with that and with all the ease and life that comes with that. I know that this open door doesn't look like that, but I've got an open door for you. I've got an opportunity for you. Church, we live in a place called the land of opportunity. And Jesus is looking at them and saying, I have the open door for you. Not your country, not your city. I have the open door for you. And nobody can shut it. It kind of sounds like what he said at one point when he said that the gates of hell will not stand against this. He says, I have an open door for you. Many times, serving God and following God is kind of communicated as this obligation, this thing of you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do this and you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this. But Jesus says, no. Following me is not an obligation. Following me is an opportunity. And we're going to get into it just a little bit, what kind of opportunity that is. Because he's going to explain that a little bit more. But following me, I get it. There's so many other things that look like these golden opportunities. But following me is an open door full of opportunity. He continues on by saying, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. A couple of weeks ago, I made a joke, and it really was a joke, but it was also kind of serious. When I called Don Osborne up here, and I had him I pointed out to him that I own Brooks shoes. I know I'm not wearing them this morning. And I made a joke in that whole process, if you were here for that part and you remember that part, that I love proving people wrong. The truth is, I do and I don't love proving people wrong all at the same time. I mean, there's a streak in me that gets a little bit of satisfaction out of it. But really, I would much rather people just be right all the time. But it's as if Jesus is saying here, hey, everyone around you, they're going to tell you that you're wrong. Everyone around you is going to tell you that you're making a huge mistake. Everyone around you is going to tell you that I'm not who I say I am, and that I never rose from the dead, and that all of this belief that you have is ridiculous and worthless. Everyone around you is going to tell you these things. But I'm going to prove you right. I'm going to prove that all of this is true. Now, we have our timeline of when we would like him to prove that all of this is true, and he doesn't usually follow it. But he says, I'm going to prove you right if you will follow me, and if you will hold true to the belief that you have in me. He tells the church in Philadelphia, and he tells us now today, that our faith and our perseverance will be validated. It's almost like when you watch those fail videos, and you're sitting there and you're going, this is not going to turn out well. And then you're right. Or when you're teaching your kid something, and what you really want more than anything is for them to just understand the truth. But they don't get it yet. And kids, just so we're clear, teens, those of you who are still in the room, yes, adults still mess up too, and we still have things that we figure out too. I'm not saying it's all your kids, it's all kids. But it's like when you're telling that younger person the truth, and they don't see it, and then eventually it ends up being true, and you're like, sometimes we're nicer than others about it. Sometimes we're like, I told you so. I told you that was going to be a really dumb thing to do. And other times we're like, this is what I was telling you. Like, I'm glad that you see this now. I wish that you didn't have to suffer through it the way you did, but this is what I was telling you. And he's telling the church in Philadelphia, if you will hold true to my word, if you will persevere in the midst of all the trials that are coming along, I will validate that perseverance, and I will validate that faith. I know that my teaching on loving your enemies really doesn't jive with everything that you're hearing everywhere else, but trust me on this and walk in this way. Love your enemies, and I will validate that faith that you have in me. I know that you live in a world that says get your own first, and I'm telling you to serve others and put others first. I know that everyone's going to tell you you're wrong on this, but hold with me here. Listen to what I have to say. Hold true to this, and I will validate that this really is indeed the best way to live life. This really is the way things are designed. I know that you're told to just accumulate everything here on this earth, to get all the nicest things here on this earth, to get the most comfort that you can have here on this earth. And I know that my teaching is, well, it's not that. Because Jesus is saying, I realize that I'm teaching you to stop worrying about stuff on this earth and instead store up stuff in heaven where things won't rust and moths won't destroy. And I know that goes against all this, and people are telling you, you're being an idiot. Save up, save up, save up. Get all the stuff now, because when you die, nothing matters anymore. And Jesus is saying, but if you'll hold true, I will validate that this truly is the way things are designed to be. I will validate your faith. I will validate your perseverance, and others will see. And it's not going to be about you having the pride of getting to look at everybody in the eye and saying, told you so. Enjoy hell. I'm going to head upstairs. It's not for that. It's him saying, look, I've got an awesome opportunity for you, and I will validate your faith and perseverance in that opportunity. In Psalm 46, the psalmist writes, God is our refuge and our strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. And Jesus he's not using those words, but he's reminding us of that message, that though all of this will come at you, I will be your firm foundation, and I will validate that faith in me. And he continues on. He says, I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Now, let's disconnect the human side of this so that we can connect to what Jesus is saying here. When he says, hold on to what you have, he's not saying, make sure that nobody ever takes anything from you. Protect your house, protect your car, protect your stuff. What's yours is yours. Don't share it with anybody else. He's not talking about any of this material stuff. He's saying, hold on to the faith that you have in me. Hold on to the firm foundation that you have in me. And nobody will be able to take away your crown. It is so easy to get distracted by all the things that are around us in this world. And to allow the thing that we have that is the absolute most valuable, to allow that to be taken away. Because we got so distracted holding on to this by chasing after all of this stuff over here. And the next thing we know, we realize all this stuff over here fell through on all of its promises. And we've let this just drift away. And somebody else take it. An enemy take this away from us. He's saying, hold on to what you have. Stop waiting for tomorrow to get it back if you've lost it. Church, I mentioned that we have an incredible opportunity. And when he says, hold on to what you have, that's part of what he's talking about, is the opportunity that we have. These numbers are a little bit old, not like super old, but they're a little bit old, so they're going to be a little outdated. But just to give you an idea, this was Pew Research done about the weekly church attendance in the state of Indiana. 34% of baby boomers, raise your hand if you're a baby boomer. Actually, real quick first, how many of you don't know what generation you're in? Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to double check. Because for a long time, I didn't know what generation I was in. 34% of baby boomers attend church almost every single week. 26% of Generation X attended church almost every single week. Raise your hand if you're Gen X. Okay, you are the people who are just a little bit older than I am. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Now, the millennials, because millennials are the generation that really doesn't get along with each other, we have the older millennials and we have the younger millennials. So the older millennials actually have a name all for ourselves. We're called the X-gennials because we actually relate more to Generation X than we do to millennials. We don't want to be a millennial, but we are, so it's a whole big, long story. We're a very unified generation, let me tell you. But 10% of the older millennial generation attends church weekly. Raise your hand if you're in the older, like if you're a millennial, but you don't want to be a millennial. That makes you an older millennial. Okay, yep, that would be me. 12% if you're a younger millennial attend church weekly. Of everybody all combined, 37% of people in Indiana attend church pretty regularly, as in almost weekly. 32% consider regular attendance to be once or twice a month or a few times a year. And 30% would say, I don't ever go to church. I don't have any interest in any of that stuff. And while church and church attendance is not a direct barometer of following Christ, it is part of following Christ. And it is a measurable that we have. And what we see when we look at those numbers, I heard a little bit more recently than these numbers, that to be considered a regular church attender, it means that you go 1 to 2 times a month. And I would ask you, to be considered a regular employee, would it work to go once or twice a week? Now, for some of your jobs, maybe. To be considered committed to the team, would showing up to 1 out of every 4 games be considered committed, or 1 out of every 4 practices? And no, this isn't practice and this isn't work, and I understand all that. But do you see how we get so distracted by everything else and it pulls us away from this, the thing that he said to hold on to? Because we were told not to forsake meeting together with one another, because we need one another. We don't need this building, but we need one another. We have an incredible opportunity. We are surrounded by people who don't know Jesus, who don't want to, or who just don't know him. What will we do with that opportunity? Jesus continues to write, "The one who is victorious meaning the one who holds on. I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Now, I would love to spend the time talking about the significance of names, especially 2,000 plus years ago, and how names would get changed. You look at Jacob, who became Israel. You look at Abram, who became Abraham. You look at Sarai, who became Sarah. You can look at all of these different names and the significance of all that. Maybe someday we will. Or if you want to talk about that afterwards, I would love to have that conversation with you too. It's fascinating to see how much names meant. Even now as we have children, Sarah and I, we talked at length about what we were going to name our children, and no, I don't like that one, I don't like that one. She didn't like any of mine, so we ended up with all of hers. But it works out okay. But we still spend time talking about names. Then it was even more important because the name had meaning behind it. And Jesus looks at them and he says, I'm going to give you my new name. Regardless of what your past was, regardless of what mistake you've made, I'm going to give them my new name. And when I say we have opportunity, we live in a world where people are searching for identity everywhere they go. They're searching for their sexual identity, their gender identity, their racial identity, their national identity. They're looking for their family identity. Identity conversations are everywhere that we look. I'm getting ready in a few weeks to speak at a youth camp in Minnesota where our conversations are all going to be centered around what we are becoming and what Jesus wants us to become, our identity in Him. And Jesus says, I'll give you a new identity. And we have the opportunity in a world surrounded by people looking to explain to them and to share with them that new identity that He wants to give them. As they search everywhere, we have the opportunity to let them see where the greatest identity can be found, where the greatest opportunity can come from. We get that. We have a choice as to whether or not we will stay silent or whether or not we will share it with anyone that we come into contact with. Often, we stay silent. We talk about it in here, we talk about it amongst ourselves, but we stay silent everywhere else. In the world at large in which we live, Monroe City, Indiana, I don't know if you've noticed this. It's not even really on the map when you look at the big map. I've told you before, 3 years ago, almost to this day, when we moved to town, before that, when we got the call, we're like, where's that? And that's something that sometimes we like about this place is, hey, people don't know where we are, which means they leave us alone. And that's kind of nice sometimes. But in the world at large, it's easy to look at us here in Monroe City, Indiana, and be like, we are just a small, teeny, tiny little blip on the map. When you look at the globe, you don't see Monroe City. When you look at the nation, you don't see Monroe City. When you look at the state, oftentimes, and trust me, I've looked, you don't see Monroe City. When you look at the county, it usually starts to show up, but not every time. So it's so easy to sit there and say, we're just teeny tiny, little Monroe City. Small city, small school. Easy to look at our school and be like, how is that going to make a big difference in the world in which we live? How are kids coming from a place like this going to make a big difference in the world in which we live? And now, while by average church size, we are well above average weekly attendance, when people are looking at what they would consider to be a big church or a small church, we would fall into the small church range. We're not in the thousands. We're in the hundreds. And it would be so easy to look at that and be like, what opportunity do we have? And Jesus looks at this seemingly small, insignificant group of people in Philadelphia, and He says, I have a door that I have opened wide for you. I have opportunities for you every single day. Everywhere you look, I have opportunity for you to go out and to share this new identity with other people. I have opportunity for you to go out and to share the gospel with everyone that you walk in, that you come into contact with. We started this morning singing a song about freedom that we have through the Spirit of God. And I understand that this is the 4th of July and we're celebrating a different kind of freedom, but church, American freedom can be taken away. American freedom is not guaranteed. And while some might burn me at the stake for this, I would say it's not the freedom that we should talk about first, and it's not the one that we should fight for most. But we should be fighting for people's eternal lives. We should be taking that word to them and that identity, not the identity of American Christian, but a Christian American, is what we should be taking to people when we leave this room. Jesus looks at the church in Philadelphia and says, the opportunity's there. It's wide open. I remember Doug Reynolds sitting at a table at P-Fections in the year 2019. I believe it was in November of 2019 when Sarah and I came out to visit for the very first time. And I was sitting there going, why are we in a place called P-Fections? This sounds disgusting. I've recently found it's a good restaurant. But at the time, I was afraid that it was going to be nothing but vegetables. I remember sitting at that table and Doug sitting down with my wife and saying, hey, let me tell you about the opportunities that are available for somebody who grows up in South Knox in Indiana. And he proceeded to tell us mostly about your children. I don't mean that as a diss. I mean, but he proceeded to tell us, like, it's all out there. It's not a world limited because you grew up in a small town. Church, we are, by the world's standards, small. But I believe that these words that Jesus wrote to the church in Philadelphia, which I am so glad fell on this weekend, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't intentional that on the 4th of July, this weekend, this is what we would be talking about. And that we would be looking at a church that was nothing but encouragement over the perseverance that they have. I believe that he would look at the church in Monroe City, Indiana, and he would say, if you will hold true. When people began to ask us why, before we moved here, all we really had to tell them was, because we know it's where God wants us to go. And after we got here and people began to ask us about the church in southern Indiana, we began to tell them about the fire that we saw in people. We began to tell them about the passion that we saw in people. We began to tell them about the commitment to Christ that we saw in people. The excitement for things that were happening in people as they looked at what Jesus could do in church. I still see it today, but I also understand as I read these letters, we can lose it. And we can let it go if we allow the other distractions to come into our lives and to pull us away. So I ask you this morning, will you grab on to the opportunities? Will you walk through the open doors? Because the victor's crown is for those who are victorious against distractions and for those who have walked away. He says, come on back. The victor's crown is for those who persevere in the face of persecution and for those who have given up in the face of persecution but want to come back. The victor's crown is for those who hold on to their faith, and it's for those who have lost their faith but want to come back. And it's for those who will walk humbly together with Jesus, and it's for those who have allowed pride to waylay them but want to come back. He says, I am ready, and the door is open. And church, that is the invitation that he has for us to take freedom, to take identity into the world that we have around us. Will we have ears to hear? And if we will, let us hear what the Spirit says to the churches and to our church today.